Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I've got a video for you on how to optimize Modern Warfare for streaming. This is mostly a PC-based guide because it's sponsored by Nvidia, but some of the tips that I'm going to give do apply to OBS in general, this game in general, and streaming in general, so it is a sort of console guide as well. The first link in the description is a link to the GPU bundle, where if you buy any 20 series GPU from Nvidia, you get Modern Warfare for free. So if you're playing on PC, that's a fantastic deal. And once again, I do want to remind our console fans here that the capture cards will help you encode console gameplay better too if you're streaming through OBS on a PC. My last video on frame rate optimization had several mistakes, and that is one that I kind of can't take back, can't fix, and I wish I could have done better, so I would just like to apologize for that one. I goofed, and I want to do this optimization video much better. It's more up my alley anyway, since streaming and content creation is literally my job. The first thing to keep in mind when optimizing Modern Warfare for streaming is that the audience comes first. Your audience needs to have the best viewing experience possible, not you having the best gaming experience possible. The best example I can give for this one is that I am colorblind. However, I don't stream, record, or play using any colorblind assist features because it skews the colors of the game and it'll make it look weird to about 95% of my audience. I would instead rather deal with the handicap of colorblindness and ensure that my audience has the highest quality. In the context of today's video, that means being willing to turn down a few settings if necessary for OBS to run properly, and we're going to be focusing on OBS a lot today. The better graphics card you have, the less you will have to adjust. So I've got a 2080 Ti, and in my case, I don't usually have to turn down very much, but that wasn't always the case. So let's jump into the optimization of the game. The very first thing you want to do is disable the really annoying world and gun motion blur, which I'm showing off right now. It's on by default in Modern Warfare, but you'll notice the world is blurry, my gun is blurry. This is actually worse on console than it is on PC. In my personal opinion, it's very distracting and annoying to look at. So what you want to do is go to your options. It's in your graphics options, and all the way at the bottom, you want to turn world motion blur off. And you also want to turn off weapon motion blur because that's ugly as well. There's no reason to have it on. And finally, your film grain will be 25/30 by default. And you want to put that to 0. None of these settings look good when streaming. They might look okay to your eyes when you're gaming. They don't to mine. I hate them. But when you're streaming, you want the cleanest picture possible because not everybody's going to be watching at the highest resolution. So step one is just to turn those things off. In our general settings, if you want to do PC, I generally recommend a higher field of view. 80 is standard for consoles, so I just had it on console so that my testing would be consistent for in-depth. Personally, I prefer it about 95 to 100, and I'm just going to leave it on 100. We'll just make it 100 flat. I think that looks best for PC. I do prefer to turn my brightness up slightly. This is a game where you can't crank it too high, or it actually becomes harder for you to see people, but just like a few points above average will be just fine. Turning off your subtitles can be very nice for multiplayer. Not everybody likes the subtitle pop-ups down below. They're good to have on for campaign. Colorblind type you can change quite a bit, but personally I don't. I am actually colorblind, but I believe it's important to have for my viewer to have the optimal experience and not me, so I leave that disabled. Colorblind target doesn't really matter. I do turn off the text chat. Since I don't really care about gore or profanity, that's fine by me, but some people run cleaner channels. And then finally, lower down here, we have a whole bunch of telemetry options that'll show you your frame rate and your latency and your temperature and all these kind of things. And they can be very nice, and they can make your video look really PC Master Race Elite, but personally, I don't think they provide the best visual quality. I prefer to get all the junk off the screen if possible. When it comes to VSync, it's a feature that I like, but I tend not to prefer it in the in-game settings. What I did instead, I'm going to tab out here to the Nvidia control panel, which comes with any Nvidia GPU. You can click, it's not the GeForce Experience, it's its own individual control panel. Come down here to set up G-Sync, and you can enable and set up G-Sync for either monitor. I've got two in particular, Dell and a ROG one. I like this method better than the in-game method. Moving along, depending on your rig, you may or may not want to limit your frame rate. I talked to Nvidia about this, and they said that they prefer 144 Hz for everything, and they believe that gives the optimal performance. Either that or just literally unlimited works as well. They've updated Shadowplay, which we'll get to in just a moment. This is Shadowplay, so that you don't get as many frame rounding errors, and you don't get as many frame rounding errors in OBS. But since I'm paranoid and kind of an old dinosaur gamer, I limit mine to 120 just in case, because it'll always be a multiple of 60, and I save my GPU a little extra room by doing that. I've got my Nvidia highlights disabled right now, but you can turn them on. It doesn't hurt your performance or anything. It's just that you can only encode two things at once with the Nvidia GPUs. In this case, I'll be recording on OBS, and I'll have the flashback in game recording, and if I add highlights to that and other things, it's going to get much more complicated. So we leave it to 2 recordings at a time. If you start doing 3 and 4, you're gonna have a bad time. One surprising bit of advice I got from Nvidia is that in order to make your encoding easier, you want to keep your texture resolution, your particle quality, and your anti-aliasing as high as possible in the game. This makes it easier for you to encode your videos, it looks better, and is just more optimal for your system. However, not everybody's system is going to be able to run all of this on high. I'm getting game invites from people here in the middle of my commentary. Wish they would stop spamming me. There is one important thing to note, and that's that Call of Duty is not properly reporting how much VRAM is being used. There's a bug with it at the moment. So you are probably using more VRAM than you think, and in my recommendation, if you're running, say, a 2060, you should probably have your textures on normal and save high textures for 2070 or 2080, since that has the biggest impact on memory, and it's probably more like over here in this zone, you know. If you're wondering why my anti-aliasing is inaccessible, that's because I have RTX on. If I turn DirectX ray tracing off, then I can play with my anti-aliasing. But again, I want to keep that as high as possible. And RTX doesn't have that big of an impact in this game compared to others, so I'd leave it on if you can. But if your system's suffering, there's nothing wrong with turning it off if you need the extra memory or processing power. In your game volume, there is one important setting I want you guys to take a look at, and that's master volume. I think it's important to have this less than 100. Typically, most games I have mine running 80 to 75, but since Modern Warfare is loud, I turn mine down into the 60s somewhere. This is so that when you record audio, either from OBS or in your own software, your audio never goes above the maximum threshold into that red bar range, which blows out headphone and cell phone users. Recording at a lower audio volume actually gets you a better quality and allows you to adjust it manually in editing later. One of the very first things you can do to save yourself some trouble is, instead of just launching OBS normally, you right click on it and go to Run as Administrator, and this will boot up, there we go, this will boot up OBS in admin mode, which allows you to prioritize the OBS process over everything else, and if your system's not the greatest, it can save you some drop frames. And now we're finally into OBS itself. I'm recording just my webcam here instead of OBS and the game, and recording OBS. For the sake of my poor system, it can only record so much, but we're going to take a look at some of the settings here in OBS. So one of the first things you want to do is go to your settings wheel and go to your stream. Make sure you've got all your, stream keys and Mixer and Twitch and stuff put in properly. But the real meat of this episode is going to take place in the output section of the stream. If you take a look here, I have selected Nvidia NVENC H.264 New. That is their newest, latest, greatest video encoder, and that is the one that I personally recommend. I used Nvidia NVENC old a long time, I use new currently, and X264, in case you're curious, that is your processor encoding. You can use your processor, your Intel i, whatever, your AMD, whatever, in order to encode the video. However, in my experience, that is a less efficient method of video encoding. It can impact your games more, and surprisingly, using X264 actually gets you worse quality for the same bitrate. For whatever reason, the codec, the way it encodes, especially the way that it handles blockiness in video, is much better with Nvidia NVENC H.264 New, so that's the one that I recommend, and of course that's the one that's going to run better on the 20 series cards. You want to put your rate control at constant bitrate. Doing variable in this program is a mess. I've got mine set to 8000 kbps, which is a little bit on the high side, but I'm going to skip down to video. You can see I stream in 1080p 60, so I need a little bit more. If you're doing, let's say 720 60, 4000 will probably be fine. And if you're doing like super high quality on YouTube, you could take it up to 10. I prefer to put my preset at quality. I think it just gets the best results without letting OBS bog down my system. Profile high, same kind of thing. You can turn on look ahead, which is a very neat feature. It does dynamic B frames and iframes as well. It's not written there on the tooltip, but it allows the software to kind of dynamically adjust your frames so that your really like fast action-packed movement sections aren't as blurry. And psycho-visual tuning does a similar thing. It changes the way you encode the video slightly to give you better performance during fast motion. And since you're playing an FPS game, that's the thing you want. You can turn your B-frames up to whatever you want, but most streaming sites are going to recommend 2, so I'm going to recommend you leave them in 2. They might support higher and they might not. What's important to note here is that I have audio track 1 selected in the streaming section, and that is because, whoops, that's making it angry. You need to go down to your advanced audio properties and make sure that the things that you want in the tracks are there. In my case, I've done some crazier stuff with it, but I have desktop audio in track 3 and my microphone in track 1, and I had in a different scene the Elgato's in 2. But if I stream, the only thing people will hear is my mic. So for streaming, just make sure that everything is turned on for track 1. But for recording, only turn on one individual track, because as I'm about to show you, in the recording tab, one thing to keep note is that I'm kind of a dinosaur and I've had mine on custom FFmpeg forever, but the reality is that the better one to choose is standard. And what I want to do is instead choose the Nvidia NVENC New so that I'm encoding in the good thing, and it'll open up a new submenu so that I can choose exactly what I want to have going on for streaming, in which case I turn it up to 35,000 for better quality. We'll turn that on and hit apply. However, I don't know, it's hard for me to do new things some days, so I do have a little bit of information about the old FFmpeg as well. You want to change your custom output FFmpeg. This makes it MP4. You don't want to leave it on standard or you're going to get FLV files for recording. Put it in a folder somewhere. The E drive is my giant files folder. And I increased my bitrate up to 35,000 kbps for recording. The neat thing about GPU encoding is that it is by its nature much more efficient than CPU encoding, so it doesn't bog down the system very much to increase the bitrate significantly. Keyframe interval, you don't play with any of these settings, audio, whatever, fine. But what I've done here is I've turned on audio tracks 1, 2, and 3 so that it will export this into different audio tracks, so that I'm going to give you an example. When this is me editing literally the video that we're talking about right now. And where is one of these encodings? I should be able to just drop that in there. You can see how this drops in and has 3 different video tracks. That allows me to individually adjust my volume, my friend's volume, and the game volume to get just the right mix. And in my opinion, it sounds very, very nice. Not a lot to play with in audio, and replay buffer I don't think is necessary if you're running Nvidia Shadowplay, but you can turn it on if you want to. The audio settings I recommend mostly leaving on default. There is one setting here in video that can help you out. If you're playing in a really like high resolution base canvas, like 4K or 2K or something, and you're downscaling to 1080 or especially to 720 for streaming, instead of sticking with the standard downscale filter of bicubic, you can go to Lanczos, man, I can never say this right, which gives you a lot more samples, and it's going to give you a much smoother and like less blocky image overall. I don't use hotkeys because I have the Elgato Stream Deck that's just better hotkeys. And in the advanced settings, there's really not much that you should play with here unless you're having technical difficulties. This is for like if something is really broken and not working, otherwise you should really leave this alone. One thing to note is that if you are unfamiliar or uncomfortable with any of this, you can always turn on the Enforce Streaming Service Encoder settings, which will automatically change your settings to whatever the platform that you chose here to stream is. Personally, I don't use this all the time because sometimes I feel that I can get more optimal quality than what they officially recommend, but if you're new to streaming, that is a godsend. One thing that I always like to have running on my system for all of my PC recording is Nvidia Shadowplay. This is my bread and butter when it comes to making content for PC. Anytime you're seeing content that doesn't have like the face cam overlaid, which is quite a bit, that was probably recorded in Shadowplay. I'm going to turn the instant replay function off for now so that I can edit the video settings, but I always leave that on. I have mine on a 5-minute timer, so I can just hit Alt, I believe it's Alt F10 on my system, and I immediately save the last 5 minutes. It is a godsend sometimes, and in my experience doesn't have very much impact on your game or video performance. So let's go to our settings, and what you want to do to record Nvidia Shadowplay is you're going to go to Recordings. You want to make sure that you have your temporary files in the temp folder, otherwise they'll just pile up, and make sure that you have your other videos going where you want them. In this case, I just put them in the videos folder. Other times I had them going to other hard drives, just kind of depending on what I wanted. Highlights we had turned off. There's photo mode, audio, same kind of thing here. This time I can actually leave my system sounds at 100 because I've already turned the in-game sound down. However, if you don't want to play with the in-game sound, I'd recommend you pull your game volume down a little bit just so that you don't top out. Same thing with your personal microphone, top it out. And you can choose, in this case, to include your microphone on a single track or create 2 separate tracks so that you can adjust the volume of each type of sound individually. Just kind of depends on what you want. And I have used both for in-depth at different times. The most important section is your video capture section. This is where you can change your instant replay length. The more you do, the more gigabytes it's going to take up. I think 5 minutes is the best for instant replay. Honestly, 5 minutes for instant replay is usually overkill. I could probably make do with 2, but every now and then I go on a long streak. For quality, I never leave it on high. I always put mine on custom, and I usually record at the in-game resolution. In this case, I've been doing some very specific stuff, and I have it capped at 1440p. 1080 is probably the most common, but if I'm going to be on PC, why not? And for frame rate, always choose 60 FPS. That's just a godsend. 30 is ugly. Come on, guys, we're PC gamers here. And for the bit rate, depending on what resolution you're choosing, for 1440p, I would leave it on 40 if we're doing 2K 50, and if I were to change it down to 1080p, I could probably drop it down to 30 megabits per second. Of course, you can record in higher quality, but since YouTube is only going to take about 12 megabit, and you've got to render and compress all this stuff before you upload it, you're well over double overkill right here. So this is going to be good. There's another neat feature in here that I don't use very much, but you can, and it may help you a lot with Modern Warfare, and that's the game filter option. You have the opportunity of adding filters to your game to make your game look just kind of however it is that you want. And in this case, I'm just doing dumb stuff right now. You could probably add things to it. Ooh, remove HUD, that's interesting. You could probably do things to it that change the color density and all this and make it easier for you to see people in corners and, you know, clear out buildings, but I don't really use this because I think it's better for the viewer to have that sort of optimal experience of seeing the game in its native colors, because that's probably what they're going to be seeing at home, and doing this kind of stuff just gets complicated. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys something really neat that not a lot of people know about. If you press Alt F2 during the campaign, you bring up the Nvidia Ansel menu, which is a really powerful photography tool for gaming. I'm just going to go through it very briefly here, but we have our camera. You can change your roll, you can do crazy things like that. I'll give it a little tilt. You can change your field of view on the camera to like extreme PC to literally like a telescopic lens. Pretty nice. So go ahead and move this over. And the neat thing that it does is you can add filters to this. So you can make it black and white. Obviously, that's a very simple one. You can take the color and you can turn up the temperature or the tint color. We're going to go ahead and remove the color. There's a few more fun ones in here. Green screen's a really neat one. So with green screen, you can kind of it tries to guess like what object you're looking at. So in this case, I might be able to get one of these guys. Yeah, perfect. It kind of tries to guess what you're trying to key out for green screen. This is perfect for thumbnails if you just need that image. It's a little bit, you know, wonky because it's just going on game data, but the guessing is pretty good, especially when you get all close to their faces. You'll almost certainly get a great green screen shot. That I probably shouldn't have showed you guys that. You're going to start making better thumbnails than me. You have night modes. You can see, I guess I can't see colors. You have watercolor, which in my opinion, this is a really weird thing to put on. But you can do it. There's a lot of different things you can do, and let me see if I can find, aha. So you can do a regular screenshot, a super resolution photo, which is just, you can see the resolution that I turned it up to here. It can just get really insane. There's a 360 degree photosphere. These take longer to make, of course, because it takes a bunch of pictures and stitches them together. And we have the stereo screenshots as well. Most people are just going to take the basic screenshots, and you'd use this for something with your thumbnails, your content creation. Like if I wanted to get this guy over here, I'm not quite close enough, so I'm going to hit Alt F2 to back out, and I'm going to walk over here so I can get really close to this guy. It won't load your player body. So now I can get a little closer. We can go down on the ground. I'm making it very angry right now because I'm recording overlays with OBS. Please give me a little forgiveness on the frame rate right there. And let's say I want to green screen these guys. I need to have to get down here for that. Yeah. See, I get a really good start on cropping for Photoshop. Let's say if the green screen's not going to work, I'll just manually crop it. So we'll hit Alt F2. Alt F2. So we can just reboot, turn the green screen off. And let's go with, what's a fun filter here? Painterly? Oh god, yeah. Now we've got ourselves a very dramatic artsy res, and you just go ahead and hit snap, and the photo is saved in your video folder with all your other videos. Very neat tool, best for thumbnails or just sharing things with friends. That's really about it for me today. That's everything that I know about optimizing Modern Warfare for streaming and recording, except remember when I mentioned there's a bug where the game incorrectly reports the amount of VRAM that you're using? That one can get kind of nasty. It can cause your stream or recording to turn off because it's reporting such a colossal VRAM usage, your graphics card thinks that it's overloading when it's really not. I've had this happen to me live before and it's not super fun. The best way to fix it is to simply lower your textures, lower your shadows, lower your effects, and oddly don't go near the edges of the map if you're playing on PC. That can increase the load and increase the likelihood of a crash. I don't think this is going to be around for very long, so if you're watching this like a month or two after the video goes live, you probably won't have to deal with that, but it is something important to keep in mind. Guys, that's all for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something useful about content creation, about capture cards, about me or what I do for a living, and if you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe, or click that link in the description and go check out the GPU bundle. Pick yourself up a 20 series GPU and get Modern Warfare for free. Drifter out.